This is E&P Reports, a vodcast from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcast, digital, and all forms of news publishing.
And greetings once again, Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P Magazine. As always, we kick off urging those that listen on podcast platforms to follow, those that choose to watch on our YouTube channel. Subscribe button is below, bell to the right. Please engage with those, because when you do follow or subscribe, you get updates each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. Dr. Elia Powers, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here.
I'm nervous because you wrote a book called Performing the News, Identity, Authority, and the Myth of Neutrality, exploring how journalists, particularly those from historically marginalized groups, grapple with industry norms and pressure related to, quote, presentation, self-presentation. In other words, what I'm doing right now, right? Sitting in front of a microphone, talking into a camera.
Yeah, that's what we're both doing right now.
Wow. And this book is really interesting. But first, let me introduce you to the audience. And we have a tradition here at E&P. We report a lot on AI, so we no longer go to your About You page, LinkedIn profile. We go to the horse's mouth. We go to ChatGPT. And we ask ChatGPT about our guests. ChatGPT tells us who you are, then you rate it. Are you ready?
I'm ready and prepared. I've heard this, good. And I'm curious what it's going to come up with for me.
Here's what it came up with for me. We may have different ones. Dr. Elia Powers is an associate professor of mass communication at Towson University, where you specialize in journalism, media literacy, and audience engagement. Your research focuses on how people consume the news, the evolving relationship between journalism and the public, and media ethics. In addition to the academic work, Dr. Powers has contributed to several publications, providing the insights on media trends, journalism, education, and the intersection of technology and news consumption. Do I have that right?
I mean, I like it. I mean, yeah, I'll take it.
Okay, that's you.
Pretty darn good.
The book is out. It's fascinating. I'm going to urge my audience to stick around just for a second, because we'll get into it on the backside of this.
This episode of E&P Reports is exclusively sponsored by Blocks Digital, formerly Town News. Even though the name has changed, their commitment to the media industry is as strong as ever. Blocks Digital is now even better positioned to deliver integrated solutions like content management, audience development, advertising revenue, video management, and more. Join the over 2,000 news publishers worldwide that power their ongoing digital transformation with Blocks Digital, serving over 141 million monthly users who view over 6.5 billion pages of content each year. You can trust Blocks Digital to empower you, to connect you at scale with the community you need to reach. Blocks Digital, formerly Town News, now reimagined to help meet the news publishing challenges of tomorrow and beyond. Learn more at blocksdigital.com.
Okay, I'm not going to call you Dr. Powers. I'm going to call you Elia.
Oh, yeah, please. Yeah, please do.
Okay, Elia, what inspired you to write Performing the News, and why is this topic relevant, especially in today's news ecosystem?
Yeah, so just a little personal background. When I was really young, wanted to go into broadcasting. I think like a lot of young, people, young boys, wanted to be a TV, sports announcer, and sort of harbored those interests for a while. And I had a stutter when I was younger, and it kind of got a little worse as I was, going into kind of middle school, the kind of worst possible years you can think of to have a stutter in high school. And, no one ever told me, don't go into broadcast journalism, you're not going to make it. But I kind of just had the sense, through who I saw on TV and who I listened to on radio, that I didn't have a traditional, broadcast voice. So I ended up going into print journalism, which I enjoyed. I have no regrets about, print journalism for a while before I got into academia. But I always kind of in the back of my mind wondered, what would have happened had I still stuck with my initial dream of going into broadcast journalism. So fast forward a number of years, now I'm teaching a podcasting class. My stutter sort of subsided over the years through a variety of things. And I decided I just wanted to start researching, what were journalists' experiences. I started with journalists like me who had a stutter, who had gone into TV and radio, because surprisingly, there are a fair amount that that do stutter. Some of them, sort of cover it up pretty well. Others, don't. Then I kind of wanted to expand beyond just speech and broadcast voice to just appearance norms. And so the book, as you said, kind of looks at how journalists in podcasting and radio and TV, on-air journalists, how they learn about the expectations for voice, to how to have a broadcast voice when they're on air and on in podcasting, and then for TV, obviously voice and appearance, which is, your listeners will know, obviously is also a huge thing. And so so the book's based on dozens of interviews, not only with journalists who've had a lot of experiences, but also agents and speech coaches and image consultants, everyone who's in the kind of cottage industry of helping journalists sort of figure out how they're going to present themselves.
You had a wide array of people you interviewed. Some were journalists, but then some were like media coaches and leaders. So, okay, I know you want to sell a book here, but let's get into the pages. What are the most striking or surprising insights did you gain from some of these conversations as you learned what the new norms are?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the biggest surprises to me, speaking to journalists, it was not surprising that they had conversations, with their news directors and with folks that were behind the scenes that, where they were talking about self-presentation and understanding what the expectations were. What was surprising to me is a lot of the journalists I talked to kind of got a sense of how they were supposed to speak and look without even ever directly having a conversation with anyone. It was just through observation, right? Through watching how people at their internships in college dressed and looked, and one-off comments by college professors about, oh, this is what sounds or looks professional. And like you mentioned, I focused mostly on journalism, historically marginalized backgrounds. And so, those journalists were less likely to see people who looked inside of like them, especially, this is a lot of the journalists I talked to are now middle-aged. And so this we're talking about, in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, where you just didn't see a lot of diverse representation on TV. So I was really surprised by that finding, that, it really didn't even take somebody directly telling a journalist, you need to adopt the kind of, quote unquote neutral, Midwestern accent or the public radio voice. They just kind of picked up on it through osmosis.
I was going to say osmosis.
Yeah.
Drinking it in.
Yeah.
All right. So you examine how journalists learn expectations for self-presentation, but then you add this historically marginalized groups. Why did you go in that direction? Why didn't you just stay in all journalists? What is the tie-in with marginalized groups?
Sure. So, I mean, all journalists do learn, I think, some of these things together, right? So you learn to enunciate. You learn that you need to sound, you need to sound clear so that any audience can hear you, because, you hear, obviously, as a journalist, often you're not getting the audience's full attention. So, you have to look, professional. You want to look, you want to, obviously, don't want to be, overly distracting as far as, jewelry. And so, to some extent, a lot of journalists hear the same things. But the reason why I focused on marginalized groups is that, like, let's just take accents, for instance, right? I mean, a lot of journalists, and more journalists of color, for instance, right, have a lot of attention paid on perceived accents or dialect that I think just goes beyond, some of it, I think it's just over too much attention on that, where the concern is that the audience, if, you don't sound like the traditional, the Walter Cronkite, Tom Brokaw, traditional, TV news accent, that the audience just will, again, be distracted or tune out or just won't take you seriously. And so journalists of color, and also female journalists, especially with voice, right, with vocals fry and upspeak and other things, get attacked both unfairly and also just to a large degree more than male journalists do. And so these are issues that affect journalists of color and women more, frankly, than men. I mean, men in public radio have been very public that they get very few audience comments about, or fewer, I should say, than their female colleagues. And that's the reason I focused on journalists who are most likely to feel like they are being attacked for the way that they appear or sound.
And some people are now bristling at hearing that. How dare us have this perception based on gender or whatever. So let me ask you, when you did this research, did you read of or learn of or report on any pushback from any journalist against restrictive industry norms and saying, no, I'm going to be me? Or was it everybody just needs to get into the groove here?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So, part of it is, journalists things have gotten better in the industry in some areas, right? So for instance, I know this sounds like a random thing to talk about, but hair, not something that I've thought about a lot, right, in my career. But especially if you're a female in television news, you think about it all the time. And so this is one area, for instance, where for years and years, they called it kind of the anchor bob, the kind of straight mid-length haircut that if you just closed your eyes and imagined what a female TV news anchor looks like, you'd probably it's what you would imagine. And for years, I mean, journalists would question it behind the scenes, but really nobody would. For the very, very few journalists felt like they could, really deviate from that norm, right? So that involved for a lot of female journalists, hours and hours spent on straightening their hair, and for journalists who, again, not something that I had thought about before the book, but it's not only costly, but it's also can be dangerous to use like a hair straightener, right? It's been linked to cancer, so things like that, where it's actually a big deal here. It's not just a little bit of a nuisance. So long story short, now it is more common to see journalists, especially like Black female journalists, who might wear their natural hair and not feel like they have to spend all this time and energy, to straighten their hair. And that's, again, I mean, it might seem like a small thing to listeners, but if you're somebody who feels like they can then, present as they want to and not have to spend all this time when you're busy enough as a TV journalist trying to do the work you need to do, right? So there are some areas like that in voice where there have been improvements. And young journalists have told me in interviews things have gotten better. They don't feel like they're being told to kind of, try to sound a certain way as much as maybe they would have 20 years ago.
Let me try to frame this question. Give me a little time to give you some context. But you kind of led off with you wanted to be a sports broadcaster. And a lot of what you're talking about, in my opinion, has to do with people who want to enter journalism through the broadcast world. But as you know, this is a legacy publication over 100 years old that has served first and foremost the traditional legacy newspaper industry, which is now very digitized. But I go in and still consult many companies, and the first thing I say is, you got to do more podcasts. You got to do more. Every time you interview, you should be interviewing on Zoom and grabbing video, because if you start analyzing where the delivery mechanisms of the future are going, it isn't the written word. I mean, it's some form of short form video or video distribution of news. Wow. Now take someone who goes into this world not thinking they have to be in front of a camera or have to do presentation.
Right.
Now they're stuck in a world where, I mean, I almost think of it this way, and correct me if I'm wrong. When I used to fly 100,000 miles a year, got to really know, the people supporting me and, the flight attendants. Those that were bilingual had a better shot at advancement. Do you follow?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
If you are coaching now a young journalism student who just wants to, just get into the game, has just watched, the Post or an Aaron Sorkin show and just wants to be that final check on power, and I want to get into that game and expose corruption, would you say, well, you better be good at video too? I mean, you better be good at presentation, or you're just not going to have job advancement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and one of the reasons why I think, hopefully this book is timely. Yeah, I mean, even like back in the day, right? You didn't have to worry. Like when I went into print journalism, when I made the choice back in the early 2000s, I was like, cool. That means I'm not going to have to. Sure, I might have to like talk at ask a question at a press conference, and maybe I'll occasionally do a TV hit. But like, I'm going to be pretty much behind the scenes. I don't have to worry about how I sound. But yeah, now that's certainly not the case. And part of the reason also why like the voice coaching industry and image consultant industry is still pretty booming is that a lot of what they're working with is journalists, again, who are in the print world, even veteran journalists, frankly, who just have not had a lot of experience in front of a microphone, right? I mean, I just had someone recently say, we have a bunch of editors and people who are going to be going on podcasts, and we need to get them trained quickly to sound their best on podcasts. So yeah, that's absolutely a thing. Is more of an expectation that every journalist, right, is going to go on some type of media. And good, I mean, and podcasting, while we're talking about it also, I think has been one of the sort of positives here as far as, I mean, the norms, right? The podcasting is still relatively new. So there isn't this decades long history of, norms of sounding a certain way, right? It's been a much more of a case of like, you want to see, I mean, not to sound cliche, but you want to sound authentic. You want the audience to hear themselves. And so that's been a big driver in the media industry of change, right, of how we expect journalists to sound and look.
Well, the norms have changed drastically, even thanks to COVID. I mean, but pre-COVID, if I was invited to do a piece on MSNBC's morning show, they would have flown me to New York,
right,
put me in a hotel, then got a limo to pick me up, put me in the green room, made me look younger and handsomer, and then shoved me up. Now I can be in my kitchen with a cat behind me,
right,
and everybody's okay with that. Right? I mean, it's like the world is shifting. But here's the real question I have for you. I mean, At EMP, there are two issues that we have to sit on the fence on so much it hurts. Like one is unions. Half my audience, wants unionization. Half my audience are the owners and publishers. And we have to, report on both sides. Now AI, where AI can create massive efficiency in a newsroom, but to the pure journalist, it's not. It's something they fight. AI can create the character with all the traits you're writing about. Am I correct? And what is your position on that? We should say?
Oh, you mean on like AI news anchors? You mean?
Yeah,
like
why not just create them from AI? And we'll train them up and use all the algorithms, whatever they do.
Yeah.
And you give them the criteria
Right.
you've explored on, and everybody will just be fake talking about.
It's funny you mentioned that. I'm actually doing a study right now, listening back through interviews I did with like college students about having them create their own AI anchor and what they would prefer and stuff. But actually, what I'm hearing from them is they all found it fairly, even though they could actually create someone to look and sound exactly how they wanted to. What they told me afterward is, I still kind of prefer, like, this voice sounds too robotic, or, well, I still think this is, there's kind of like an uncanny valley effect going on there. So I think AI, like news presenters, like, I think there's a space for them. I think maybe as sort of a secondary or maybe like a quick update, but I don't see them replacing. I just think there's still so much of like a parasocial relationship that we develop with human podcast hosts and, and even, broadcast if you've been watching for a while. So I don't think for as far as like getting our main news from an AI news presenter, it seems like from what I'm hearing and what I've heard from the students that I did the study on, they're not so into it. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that at the moment, at least.
I'm sorry, I have to tell you, I'm not really here. I'm on a beach in Aruba, and this has all been
I had my
I'm neither of you. I'm just kidding. Although I did interview ChatGPT on my show, and she did cop an attitude. You should check that one out. All right, we're getting near the end of. We try to hold these to 20 minutes. I could talk to you for hours about this. The music's going to start to play us off. I need to ask that big 50,000-foot question. What do you hope? I mean, you worked hard on this puppy. What do you hope news organizations take away from your book in general? What is your biggest hope when you wrote this?
Yeah, my biggest hope, I mean, honestly, the audience, I mean, academic books often reach an academic audience, but I wanted to go beyond that to people in the industry, right? I mean, I hope this is, gets to journalists also. I mean, one of the things I just want everyone involved in teaching and training journalists, it's sort of a team effort, right? To get, young journalists kind of understanding what the industry norms are. I want them to understand just sort of what, how their comments and what they don't say, right? How it affects people's views of themselves and how it makes them feel like, you're either kind of, you fit in or you have to sort of, you have to kind of conform to a certain norm. And so I think, for instance, I try to get out of the habit of using the word good or bad broadcast voice. I think, people in the industry, hopefully should talk to journalists about, how do you want to present yourself and what are your hopes and, what are your concerns? And it should be a conversation rather than directives, but I also understand that people behind the scenes running broadcast stations have to think about their audience. So I don't think I'm Pollyannish about the fact that you still need to think about looking and sounding professional, but it should be a conversation, with the talent, with people coming in rather than I think just, kind of sliding into a certain norm that I think have become more outdated. That's kind of what I hope.
Where can people get the book, Performing the News, and how can they keep track of what you're up to at Townsend and stay in touch with you? I mean, go ahead and do it.
Sure. I mean, Rutgers University Press is my publisher, so obviously you can go online and it's always good to order from them or order local. But of course, other big retailers too. So that's where you can do that. And otherwise, I occasionally do my own podcasting, and so feel free to follow me. And I'd love to hear back from anyone, any listeners.
Well, it's Dr. Elia, and I'm going to spell that for those who may not know. Elia, Dr. Elia Powers, associate professor at Townsend University and author of Performing the News, Identity, Authority, and the Myth of Neutrality. Elia, it's been an honor and pleasure to have you on the program. I do urge you to send us contributing work that we'd love to publish for you in E&P as well as you keep exploring this amazingly important part, if I may add, of the news ecosystem now, being able to present in some way, shape, form, or size beyond the printed word in a way that's acceptable to the audience. Congratulations on the book, and thank you for your time, sir.
Thanks, Mike. It was great talking to you.